We're gonna go over Colletes, continue with Colletes today. I don't think I have any announcements, but I got some good questions this week about Discover Life Key, so it's really not necessarily about Colletes, but it's good to know that you are contacting us about the things that you want characters on. So I'll respond to those soon. And I think we can just go into it.
Okay. All right. We are going to continue Colletes, a little bit more on the females, then we're going to get into the males. And if you want to open up Discover Life Guides to Colletes female, that would be good. And then we will shift to males, so you can, you don't have to, but we'll, it's always good exercise to be playing with the guides as we go along. So I'm going to share. And there we go. Yep. Okay, I'm in the male guide, right? So we're going to start with the female guide. So I'll show you a shortcut to switching around. You can see in the URL up here at the top that it says Colletes_male. So we can just phi that and make it into a female. Seems to be maybe a little bit of a lag more than usual today, but hopefully that's not going to interfere. So now we're with the females. We want to, this is how you would enter into any of the guides. Click on menu and click on has, the has button. And the has button, as has been mentioned before, allows you to look at what the scorings are for individual characters. And that's a good space to explore, particularly if you have access to a collection characters and learn them by looking up who has what. So I'm looking at my notes now. We did a lot of these in the female, but I'm going to go down to 33. Note that these numbers are not set numbers. They're renumbered on the fly as characters are added and subtracted, and it's, I think it's not roughly, it is alphabetical. So I'm just using it as a shortcut to 33. So so we'll get into this in a second, but what I want to do is show you Colletes brevicornis on the screen and go here. And the reason for that is Colletes brevicornis has a unique character. And so here's the abdomen of brevicornis. I associate this relatively rare bee with sandy, dry spots. It may not be limited to that, but that's been my impression so far. Very uncommon, but when it does show up, it shows up in sand areas. And what we're looking for, here's the abdomen, is the rims. I think probably all of them, I'm not 100% sure, but certainly the T2, T3 rim is, I'm going to do a couple different angles on this, but it is concave along the rim, very unusual, and has what would appear to be a series of cells or divisions along that, in addition to being heavily pitted. But that feature, the trough, the rim, the sulcus, if you will, along the edge of the rim with the divisions of interior cells, large interior blocks of cells, unique, like nothing else has that. Let's see if we can see this from the side a little bit so you get some idea that it's quite noticeable. Oh, let me pull down the laptop screen so I can see better. Yeah, all black on black specimen again, so we run into some problems with visibility of the specimen, but I think you can see this
Sam,
right here. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Your sound just changed. We can hear you, but there's something weird going on. There you go.
Oh, I see what I did. I like, oh, I like the big screen, and then I closed my laptop, which of course has my camera and my sound thing on it. So I'm going to actually disable the big screen so I'm not distracted by it.
Okay, there we go. So keep going. Sorry.
Right. Yes. No. Thank you, Claire. You have saved this podcast so many times, or whatever this is. Okay, so let's play a little bit with the angles here. I just want you to notice that there's this unique feature in brevicornis, in case you run into it. Hopefully you do. I'm going to up the ante here and try and get to a higher magnification on it. I don't know if it shows it any better this way, but anyway, it's not a pristine curve to the rim like almost everything else is. There's this this trough along the edge. This is where you need to have access to museums, of course, to see this and to build your own collection. So just a couple more angles here. So here's the upturned rim again. Very dark, be relatively, and I believe it's a midsummer, which is unusual for Colletes in comparison. It's about, looking at it, maybe 10 millimeters. All right, so we're going to set this one aside. I'm going to put it away and pull simulans. And we're going to jump back to the guide for a second. And if we look at number 33 here in the has presentation, you see here, it says thorax pronotum shape of lateral angles. So this is relatively unique, perhaps unique. There's some bees somewhere else in the world that undoubtedly have something like this, but where the pronotum is, so the collar around the head, there part of the angle, which is the area that we often look at to see if it's at right angles or the size and shape, is actually pulled way out and comes to a point sometimes. So the nice thing is that the shape and whether it's there or whether it's not is useful. So I'm going to show you a specimen now. Colletes simulans, a nice fall aster specialist, and we'll see if we can locate that. So I'll also point out that this spike is often, ooh, very nice, it's right there, is often hidden. Let's see, maybe I'll center it a little bit better. And see, here's the spike. This is the pronotum. This whole area is pronotum. But here, this lateral angle, which all kinds of features are embedded in for some reason in different species. And it's not clear what the functions of all this different species topography is. But in Colletes, sometimes you get this. See this right here? Is it clear that you're seeing this huge spike pointing out? Let me just tell you that this is a little bit of a ratty specimen, but it's in our favor now because the hairs are matted away, and I may have cleaned it out a little bit. But sometimes that spike is hard to see in amidst a lot of hair within the region, thorax in particular, and the head sometimes has hairs coming down through this way. So it's very easy to take a tip of a pin and run it along here and see if it catches on anything. And then, of course, you have two sides, and the head can be twisted in some cases, making the spike or lack of it harder to see. So if you run into, oh, I'm not sure what I'm looking at, you know, skip that question. That's always the case in these matrix keys. So you don't have to see every character to end up with the right answer. And if you and the lack of the spike is more difficult to determine than the presence of a spike because you may think, oh, am I missing the spike and therefore calling it lacking one, or is it truly lacking? So again, be conservative, and you can always come back to that character later and play around with its presence or absence when divining what species you have. But if you see it, it's a good character. And additionally, sometimes the actual shape, like in simulans, we're often trying to divine simulans from nudus. Okay, so I'm going to, because I see it right here, I'm going to also point out that in Colletes, if we go back and look now at the hair, so we often talk about mixing of light and dark hairs. In Colletes, I think this may be mentioned in a couple places, but probably needs to be mentioned every single time. This is a species that has dark and light hairs, but it's a little confusing because some of the hairs, almost all the hairs, have white sub branches, let's call them, but the shaft can either be dark, and it may not even be jet black, but it'll be dark and the individual hairs light in others. So let me see if we can pick out a couple examples here. So let's look at this hair right here. So this hair right here is dark on the shaft, and this one is dark on the shaft, but you can see that the side branches are often somewhere are much lighter. Sometimes they're not even presenting as having darkness at all. Sometimes they look actually white. Even more so, this will be the case. There's a dark one, and here's light ones going sideways here. And in the males, I think this is even more accentuated. We'll see a male in a bit. So this also can occur in other species. So I'm thinking of Melisodes when they talk about mix of dark and light. A lot of times finding the dark hairs is something that you have to spend a little bit of time to be and take some care with. If we move to the head, like in Andrena is a good example. Andrena will often have some valuable hairs. This is a poor specimen to see, but valuable hairs just along the edge of the eye, inner eye, that are dark, and everything else might be light that are used in ID. So you can see here, dark hairs, dark shaft. These have side bars that are more obviously not completely white, and then there's white ones nearby. Okay.
Sam, we're wondering, can the dark hairs be bleached in older specimens, especially on the thorax?
So yes, but I don't know how complete that is. Something like in a big open country bee like Melisodes, Trinotis I'm thinking of often is a lovely rufusy sort of coloration to the hairs on the scutum, and those can, in older specimens, those fade to more of an off-white, if not almost nearly white, in older specimens. Colletes thoracicus is like that. A bright new shiny female is has a strong orange cast, which is a good indicator that to the scutum hairs, a good indicator that is indeed Colletes thoracicus, but then seemingly relatively quickly fades to a more, let's say, normal looking off-white coloration. So yeah, and we'll see a couple other instances where, we're looking at hair density, but it's a worn specimen, and hair density has to be implied sometimes by some of the patterns that are nearby. So we'll come back to that, and it's always good to keep these sensibilities in mind, that each of your specimens presents a little bit differently depending on age and preparation sometimes too. Okay, and actually I was going to show, and the next one was about hair color. I was going to show, instead of simulans, I was going to show inequalis, which has the same thing. So I don't think I'm going to bother to pull that inequalis specimen. I can, if there's time at the end, we can certainly do that. Okay, now we're going to go to the male. So you guys want to flip to the male guide. we're going to be looking at the very cool Colletes aestivalis, which was considered, I think, until relatively recently to potentially be one of the bees we should be extremely worried about because there's so few recent records. Then people started actually collecting off of Heuchera americana, which is the American alum root, which is just not an obvious in the field plant, and often is on cliffs and in, you know, awkward sites, let's call it. And people don't plant that species very much. They plant these weird hybrid Heucheras, which seem to not be of interest to our friend Colletes aestivalis. Anyway, I digress. But wherever you get opportunity to collect off of native Heuchera, you should. Okay, if we go to 2 here, this is
Sam,
yeah.
Can you spell that? Because I'm not seeing it in the Asher species list, at least what it sounds like it's spelled as.
Aestivalis
is what you said.
Yeah,
I was just kidding. Bye.
Okay, you got it. Okay. So let's go to number 2 here, and where it talks. So let me give you a big picture. There's a lot going on the sternites and Colletes, and often on other species groups. But because a lot of times the abdomen is inconveniently curled up and there's legs in the way, sometimes those characters aren't used very often. You can also use them, even if you don't use them in from the guides, is by just looking at them. You can often, if you have a suite of species, of any bee species, particularly in the males, look under the sternites and look for differences in patterns of the hair, because there's an awful lot going on usually in those patterns that are relatively difficult to describe in terms of a you know, the kind of thing you would want in a guide. It's not straightforward, but when you look at them, it's obviously these are different species just because of hair pattern. Sternites show more often than the tergites. Okay, so Colletes aestivalis. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to use the guide to look at these 3 characters here. So if I do only and click, so first of all, when I click only, that means that I am only going to get a list of species that are only scored for this character. In this case, that character's tufts of long hair on sides only, completely bare in the middle. And what we're looking at is the abdomen, S2, so the second sternite underneath, length of the hair on the segment, and then this is key, not including the hair of the apical hairband. So these segments, I think, always have a denser hairband, but this is not about the hairband, it's about the hair in the middle of the segment. I need to make this bigger because even I, you know, kind of breezed through that and assumed that it was just hair segment length, but it's hair segment length excluding the hairband. So again, these specimens can be ornery to look at, but let's look at this. So when we do this, oh, look, Colletes aestivalis is the only specimen that is only scored for that. So it really has the long hair thing in spades. So that would be the one we want to look at. We're going to look at that, but if we change this to has, now has will give us, once we hit search, a list of all the species that are scored for this character, but it will include species that might be scored for these others too. So usually that means that those species are not as rigidly in a category and therefore not as good examples. So here we also see the rare in the east, Colletes andrewsi, maybe. So, which I have not in my collection. And also it's scored for more than having hairs for just having these long hairs, unlike Colletes aestivalis. So let's jump to Colletes aestivalis now and take a look at that character. And I have to set up this shot. So again, we're looking not at the rim, which our eyes normally go to in these kinds of exercises, but we are going to the interior space, and we have to see through all kinds of legs and other things here in order to do that. I'm going to bring down the magnification. We're also dealing with S2, which is more in the inconveniently positioned leg category. So I think, but a lot of times what's going on S2 is mirrored in S3, S4, and so forth. So I'm pretty sure this is the rim of S2 without doing a lot of investigating. And what you're looking at, and we'll change this, but you can hear S3 is also here. Here's the rim. There is some hair along there, not much, or at least not in this shot, very apparent that there's a rim of hair. But if we play around with the focus, we can see at the far sides here, and we'll change the angle. There's a whole bunch of long hair along the edges of the segment. And there is a little bit of hair there, but it's essentially, when you get to the middle, bare, you can see here, bare of hairs. So these are literally tufts of hair. You can see tuft of hair, tuft of hair, tuft of hair on down. Let's pivot this a little bit, see if that gives us a better shot. I think it does here. So I'm going in and out of focus, but you can see each of these segments has this big tuft of hairs. And then if we peer into the interior, which is relatively dark, we don't see any hairs. So very strong contrast and unique, really, a unique feature of Colletes aestivalis. So while I have it here, another feature that we will come to in a minute, but now that I have the specimen, I might as well show it, that Colletes aestivalis has a good, shows well and is not a common feature, is the malar space angle. So let's see if we can get this in here first. And so the malar space, again, is the space, oh, this will show up nice, oops, is the space between the eye and the mandible, if there is one. So sometimes the mandible basically kisses right up to the rim. So here's the compound eye. And so sometimes the mandible, which is here, is kissing right up to the edge, and there's no malar space. So this is probably more often than not the common presentation for bees in most groups. But in some, like Colletes and Andrena, which sometimes are trying to reach way into long corollid or longer corollid flowers, their face lengthens, and this is one way to get a longer face, is to add some distance here between the mandible and this. So when we talk about the angle of the malar space, what we're doing is we're talking about whether the mandible is parallel to the eye or not. And you tell that by looking at the distance between the two connection points, I'll call them. I forget what the scientific jargon is, but from here to here, and also from here to here. I'll change the shot in a minute, but you can see that it's not parallel. So this distance is short, this distance is quite clearly longer. So there's an angle to that. Let's see if any sort of moving around here makes a difference in presenting that. I think it's a pretty straightforward thing. Not many species have this. Colletes aestivalis is another. relatively dramatic. So now we're looking cheek side, clypeus, antenna. Here it's short, here it's quite long, meaning that this angle is, for whatever reason, the plane, the line of the base of the mandible is not parallel to the bottom of the eye in this species. Others it is. I'm not going to show them again right now from lack of time. I'd like to get through Colletes males today, but we can come back to that. All right, so I'm going to look now at my notes and see. So now we want to go to Colletes latitarsis to show the more subtle aspects. So now we're going to go back, revisit S2 again. And what we're asking in this case is S, and I don't have great specimens, but it's okay. I've had to mangle it a little bit to show this. We're asking, are the hairs in the interior, not on the rim? And you can see that there are, so we're looking mostly at, we're looking right on straight on the side, and we're mostly looking, actually, let me shift it, well, maybe I won't. So to orient,
Sam,
here's the
Maller space.
Pardon? Yeah.
So are we referring to the Discover Life character that says head, Maller space, shape of even width from top to bottom, space narrow at top and much wider at bottom?
Yes, that would be, according to my notes, 33.
Yep.
In the male and the current
Confirming.
numbering. And so if you think that's confusing compared to what I showed, or maybe it was what I showed was confusing, send me some wording and we'll change it. Or we can, what we find is that we often need to add more words, and because we're often using wording that we've borrowed from an existing guide, and sometimes that's inadequate. We've modified all these characters so many times. We really do encourage people to say, oh, wouldn't it be better if you worded blah, blah, blah like this rather than like that? And we can change it right away. You see the results the next day. So on this, this is Colletes latitarsis. I just want to orient you here. So here is the tergites. These are tergites, and the sternites are out of focus back here. I'm showing things from the side so that you can see the hairs, I think, a little bit better that way on the sternites, but just so you know, the tergites usually curve over from the plane on top, and the sternites are tucking under the tergites and are therefore generally have less exposed area on the body of the bee. So let's see if we can see anything much. So now, just that with that turn, here's going to be the edge of the tergites, right around in here. These lines, you can play around with your specimens and find these better. And what we're looking for now is, I'll try and show this in several ways, is the notion that hairs along the edge of this S2 are taller than hairs to the interior, which of course is there's a lot of stuff going on in there, including hairs that don't belong to S2. I believe that's S1 hairs showing up. So let's see if I change this angle a little bit again. If we can see that better. I'll also point out at the same time another character, another sternite character, which is hairs to the interior are light colored, which is mostly the case for almost all species. And then on the sternites, there are hairs on the lateral sides that are darker. And this, I think, is generalized to S2 through 4. Here, it's present here on S2, but you can see them maybe a little bit better on S3 and S4. See, these are dark hairs. These are coming out. Look at here. Look at here. You can see the boundary of the tergites lapping over to the sternites. Here's a tergite. Here's a tergite. Here's a tergite. And if you look here, these sternites are plates that are tucking right into those tergites. These are the dark hairs at the edges, and then there are white hairs to the interior. Again, we're ignoring these apical bands at the moment. And so we're asking the question, oh, you have dark hairs on the outside and long hair and white hairs on the inside. When we look at the lengths, which is difficult to see here, we're comparing the lengths to the interior to the lateral sides. Mostly this character is confusing, I will just say, and a lot of times it's only useful as a referencing. A lot of species are scored for both the common characters, which is even versus not even. So you're really looking at this character to be useful only when you have a clearly obvious case of long hair on the sides, short hair on the inside. And I probably need to go through all the Colletes again and just make sure the scoring is up to date, because it's pretty subtle. And one of the sternite characters I think I'm going to get rid of completely, because I was like, these are not making sense. And I really rarely use them. So here was the hair in the middle short, and we're doing only, there's 5 that are only short, and there was our Colletes latitarsis. And if we do all roughly the same length, be it long or short, we get 10. But if you added up all these, it's clear that's far less than the actual number of bees in the group, and that means that most of these are scored for more than one category, meaning that they're scored for having this, and also indicating a tough character. But particularly when you're comparing your specimens, so this is really your endpoint. If you can find if you have a good collection or you have access to a good collection, you want to look at compare the hairs underneath the sternites to known specimens. We're trying to quantify something that's tricky to quantify here, and pretending like you have no access to anything. And on the schedule would be more pictures of sternites for all these bees, but we have such a schedule that you cannot believe. But if you send us pictures, we'll put them up. Okay, so now we're going to do only, and here's roughly the same length. Let's see what we had there. Oh, I've got my notes. Same with simulans. So let me pull a simulans here. Again, this is a male. So this one was latitarsis. And simulans here. Again, our fall aster specialist. And on this one, we're going to be looking to see that this is scored as having a uniform interior hairs throughout S2. We'll see if we believe that. Tricky because there's a pin in the airway. Let's see if we can get an angle this side, maybe the other direction, perhaps there. Okay, you can see the apical rims there, but we want to know about the interior hairs from the lateral edges to the interior. This is S2, this is S3. S2, I think, given doing this under the microscope is going to be difficult. So we can look at our surrogate, which will be S3, which is not mentioned, but often is basically the same. And what we're seeing is essentially no tufts or bunching of longer hairs on the side. And as I move the focus through, you'll see that all those hairs are about the same length. And also you can see not the easiest character. And whenever there's a character that is the same, equal, that kind of thing, you know, nature doesn't make same equal, really. It's one of the most difficult characters, and a lot of times, a lot of species are going to be scored for that. And what you're really looking for is the other ends. Long, short, not equal in an extreme as the useful character. The muddy middle is, oh, it's about equal. If your mind is like, is that about equal or is it a little longer, then you should not use that character. Or you should be scoring like it might be equal or longer, score them for both. Conservative identifications. Okay, did the dark on the sides, top and bottom. So we have simulans now. I also want to illustrate we go back to the characters here. We always turn these off because if we leave even like the only on and go to something else, it messes up the algorithm. Let's make sure I have that off. I have done that many times. If we go to 4 here, so here we're looking at a series of sternites. So the S2 for 4, comparison of hair density between sternal and tergal hair bands. So now we're paying attention to the bands we were ignoring before. And we have the sternal hair bands equally as dense. So again, we have this equally as dense, kind of vague, and then sternal hair bands less dense than tergal hair bands. So if we do our only thing and we want to look at the thing where they're less dense, I believe we run into maybe if we look at, did I write down to minus the middle? Sternal hair bands equally dense. We can look at, we'll come back and look at distinctus here. But if we look at equally as dense, because I think we have simulans in that. Yeah, so let's look at simulans and look at the density of those two things. So we have simulans on this scope. Here's the apical bands, so quite white, quite dense. And then in contrast, we're going to look at the tergite hair bands, and we'll see something that happens an awful lot, which is, oh, you know, this specimen is a little beat up. And you can tell from the wingtips that it's been around for a while. And that usually means that the back is scraped more than the sides. And if you have a poor preparation, it adds to the problem. So here is a good example of both bad prep or less than optimal prep, and you know, which might be just the fact that you have goopiness on your specimens. Let's see if I can play with the white balance, and not much is going on. So we're looking at the tergites, and if we look in the center here, apparently the sternites, which is not a category, by the way, the sternites have way more hairs than the tergites. So the case is, I believe, absolute that maybe not in Thoracicus, but anyway, there should be a strong hairband in almost every case in Colletes across here. And this shows probably wear. So the center line often wears out. And then it also is showing clumping due to the hairs not being washed well or having something on them that prevents them from showing. But if we turn to the sides here, we reveal a bit more about the original state of these hair bands. So you see this over and over again. Let's even go up higher and try and get some more light on here. So you're seeing this modeling on here. Like take this one in particular, this is more in focus. So these dark and light patches, those are all hair. And the dark patches shows what happens to white hairs when they're exposed to gunk, let's call it. They turn to black hairs or ambiguous hairs. You can see, usually you can see a couple hairs have escaped the gunk patch and show back up to their true colors, but this is why we like washing. And if you look, there's actually indications that there's just hair throughout here. And so what we have is an old specimen, the hairs on the middle of the back where it's exposed to more abrasion are lower, but the side ones are full. And then we get a ability to say that the sternal hair bands are about the same as the tergites. But so just several lessons, so to speak, there. If we go back to the character, though, we really don't have sternal bands more dense. We only have equal as dense. So this is a, so it's a gimme on that specimen that because the sternal bands seemed more dense, so equal or nearly so, that's always the cop-out in these guides, including ours. So we would agree with that, and indeed it's scored, simulans is scored as that, having that character. So let's go now to only species that are scored for less dense. You see 12 things. I think distinctus, I don't have that in my notes, but I believe distinctus is what I was looking at there. Get rid of this one. Let me just make sure that this is, looking on the other microscope, this is a male, because it seems like it is a female. So this is inappropriate, but you'll see the female has a quite a different undercarriage. So I'm probably going to skip over right now. We can try and find one later, but I want to move on one that has distinctly less hairs. There's quite a list here, including our friend latitarsis. So I'm going to stop with that for the moment. But I think you see where things are going. So this character here, which is 5, I spent a bunch of time working on this one recently. This has been here. I never use it. And I realized why I'm not using, because it's probably should be deleted, and I'll probably delete it right after this talk. So sorry, guides are always in flux. So now if we looked at the malar space wider at the bottom, aestivalis. Let's go to 38. A lot of, so you can see, as in many of these guides, particularly guides that have dealing with very similar species groups, you're dealing with many this versus that kinds of things, and more relative characters as you do so. We could possibly circle back and look at common problem groupings in Colletes at some point. But boy, do we have a lot of species to go through. And Claire was mentioning bombus at the beginning. I'm going to take what Claire has done and send it out to a number of bumblebee experts and try and get people to talk about individual species bumblebee ID for different regions of US and Canada, north of Mexico. We can later go to the south, but right now that's our concentration. We also have Jonathan Mausley volunteering to do Xylocopa, and we will continue to ask experts of different kinds to come on and present on their particular specialty groups. And I mentioned that we're looking for people to talk about genera guides. We're going to do that, but we still haven't set any dates. So if we go to 38, we're back to this. I want to show this again because the metapleura, the semi-transparent overhanging ridge, tricky and worthy of another look. So we're going to pull Americanus. And this one, so this is present, if you recall from the other day, this is present in males and females. Just the right side, I think it was this side that had it better. And finding it is potentially problematic. And because again, what we're looking for, wow, that is very bright. What happened here? A little white balance? Okay. So I will look at both sides here, but what you're looking at, scutum, front wing, hind wing is hidden. This is the, let me back out a little bit. This bigger segment over here is the, and yes, almost all Colletes are very hairy. So again, often you're poking around with the pin. This is the mesepisternum or pleura, and then this is the metepisternum over here, which is they're bounded by suture lines. This is basically the below the hind wing insertion point and is long linear. There's a mound up towards the top, and on the overhang of that mound, and we'll try and do both sides here, is a, and I'm not even 100%, I'm looking at it right here, but see that little rim there? So it's like a shelf overhang, and it's, in a few species, it's clear, transparent, translucent, and has an amber color to it. Other times there's nothing, other times it's dark, but a lot of times those are scored for nothing because it's difficult to see that. I'm at high power. Let's see if we flip to
the white. It's still pretty washed out.
Is it pretty washed out? Okay,
yeah,
let's try that.
Helped a bit, but if you could
adjust. I'm hitting automatic white balance, and it might have darkened it a little. Okay, let's go to the other side, and we will attack the character from more than one direction. All right, so there the wings are going to be hiding it. So let's run an upside down. I'm using modeling clay here. Is it modeling clay? I'm not sure. It's plasticine clay. It stays, it's like an oil clay mix. It doesn't really dry out. Oh gosh, there we go. All right. So here is the front wing, hind wing is hidden, it's right in here. This is the long, narrow edge of the metepisternum. Here's the mesepisternum, mesepisternum. Now I'm getting confused. Here, old name was pleura, and then there was this one, metapleura. And let's see if we can find, so topographically, there's a mound involved with an overhang. When I looked at this, it was a very obvious specimen, but now I am less convinced of that. It should be right in here. And I am not seeing it well. Let's see if we can get a better shot from the other side. Well, you can barely see it. So here's one of the suture lines running up. This is now over here, the propodium. And here, see how hard it is to see? So right there is this semi-translucent edge to this mound area that is surrounded by hairs. So under many circumstances, you take a point of a pin and you just rub that point and it will pick off the hairs and you can expose some of these areas. On Melisodes, you're doing that to expose the hairs along the perimeter of the tegula. Same problem. So that is just not the best look. One more try here to see if we can see that through the hairs. If you see it, it's really helpful though in ID for this group. If you don't see it, you have to wonder if you're just missing it. And so again, another thing to skip. There's many, oh, there it goes. So there are many characters within these tricky groups that you really, really want to avoid guessing on, because again, if you guess wrong, then yeah, game over. Your correct identification is simply gone. Now you can guess and look at the results and then click it back off again. I do that all the time. And maybe you circle back again. But here again is a nicer look. So here's the tegula over the front wing. The hind wing is tucked back here. The head is up here. There's an antenna coming down. This is the pronotal lobe, probably all hairy, and the pronotum there. This is the mesepisternum, the big plate below there, and then on here is the narrow plate. But now we have a pretty good shot of the raised area at the top of that. I don't know any other species that does this. Raised area at the top of that, and the conch-like shelf that forms underneath, and here's this amber rim. We are at my max of this microscope to see that, but that amber rim is pretty exposed there. So that is good. I had on my notes to show more mixed light and dark with simulans hairs again, but again, that's not an issue. If you look at, we saw that I think pretty well. If you look at Americanus, here's a species with all light hairs, like all the shafts are light colored too. You can see that I think pretty readily. So I guess I'll stop at the moment, and if people, we are a little early, maybe because I was a little more organized this time, we can revisit some things, show some more shots, take questions. What would people like to do?
We don't have anything in the chat right now, but if anybody wants to unmute, you're welcome to.
I'll mention that a lot of these Colletes are specialists. My favorite was something that Tim McMahon, who's on here now, I think, and Don Harvey kind of figured out, which is that Colletes ciliatus is a daughter specialist. Like who even would have guessed? But that seems really clear now. It's also probably throughout the country. There are records in Kansas and Wisconsin, but that's, like literally that's about it. So look at daughter, the end of the year in marshes. Tim, do you have anything to add about that one? Many specialists within this group.
We're also, Spencer was wondering if we have Colletes kincaidii to show.
I might.
Are you looking for a male or a female or any specific trait, Spencer, we could focus on real quick?
Either one would be fine. I guess a female.
All right, let's see. What were we just looking at? Americanus. Okay, I just need to put this back. Okay, I've got a series, and I believe kincaidii is a, I think is it Eulophi that it's often confused with? And I could have this wrong, but I don't know what DL says. We'll move this into the light here, but it's not, it's more of a prairie species, I believe. So I don't see it very much in my escapades. Ooh, this light is terrible all of a sudden. Let's see if I flip the bottom plate to dark. Dark green, apparently. I haven't vetted these at all, so I don't know why is the white balance so crazy? Maybe I'm too close. How about that? So do you have specific questions? Like, that's what I have in my collection as a kincaidii. Let me pull, I can add some more, but it's just not a species that I can whip off a bunch of characters for off the top of my head, except that I know that keying it out is problematic, and these are not great looking specimens.
I was curious because we have it on the Vermont list, but I've yet to see a specimen, and I wasn't even sure what to look for.
Oh, is this Spencer?
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I know, it might be good to, maybe you have, look up the Discover Life maps for it. I think of it as a Midwestern species, but that whole, there's these little sort of midsummer Colletes that are very uncommonly collected that, but do show up, and they just sludge all together in the guides. So, yeah, I don't know what to tell you, whether there's not, I think I called them Eulophi a number of years ago, some from Maine or even maybe Quebec I was looking at. But again, I'm talking off the top of my head, so I could be wrong. But probably not the most helpful thing. I think I got a mail here. I'll throw that up. So a lot of what I do in a case where it's like, oh, do I have this? What, I have a question mark. It's not an obvious specimen for what of anything. Is I have access, or did until COVID, to the national collection. So I just save those up, and I then spend a lovely evening doing comparisons with known specimens. So in absence of that, then you might have to travel or ship out specimens to get confirmation. And what we find is that nobody does this kind of work perfectly. So I have been disabused of some of my identifications throughout my career. To this day, I'm like, oh, you mean that's not what I was looking at? So keep in mind that everyone fails to a certain level, and that getting second opinions on your identifications is good. Just because you have a guide doesn't mean that you will use it as the author intended, and that there's always mistakes and nuances and subtleties that may not be apparent.
Okay, Sam, we have some requests that we're not going to do today, but I'm going to remind you about for going forward. We have wanting some demonstrations of different kind of jargons between hair, oppressed hair, fascia, pubescence, integument color, and hair on tergites. So as we go over stuff in the next couple sessions, want to hit those key questions, but I don't think we need a whole would
Yeah.
make sense to make a whole session about
Right.
those jargon in specific.
Well, here I can give you an example of oppressed hairs. So oppressed hairs, a lot of times we don't use the word oppressed in the guides. We'll talk about prone or, there's a couple other things, because oppressed hairs is not something that people naturally understand. And that's why the question's there, right? So oppressed basically means prone, usually thickened by the presence within the oppressed hair. This is particularly true of triepilus and apilus, which have even smaller, almost scale-like oppressed hair. So oppressed means lying down, prone, flat, flush to the surface, rather than, again, not a great specimen perhaps, but here the oppressed hairs form hair bands. So most hair bands are composed, or is it comprised? Composed of oppressed hairs lying down like this. And the sternites, let's flip over. Let's see what the sternites on this bad boy look like. Usually even more so. And any hair that's not lying down is usually thinner and has fewer branches. I don't know why. It seems to be a function. Let me get way down here. Function of that. If you're going to have a, I don't know if I can show this well. If you're going to have a prone hair, this one really has very wimpy sternal hair bands, but they're still prone. I shouldn't say that all prone hairs are thickened and such. So, for example, I can think of on the sternites in Andrena. There's some crazy things on the sternites in different ones. Look under Nomata, look at S6. But on the sternites of many Andrena, like the melandrena, you often have to gaze upon the sternites to tell the males apart. Those hairs can actually be oppressed and also be of the normal hair type, but they're simply lying prone. So when we talk about oppressed hairs, I think oppressed is definitionally meaning just lying down. But usually when you hear oppressed hairs, you're talking about prone, shorter, smaller hairs in a dense configuration, almost always white, that have many branches to the hairs. If you look at high magnification, forming a colored patch. So Epilus, Triepilus have magnificent patterns to their oppressed white hairs. And I don't know if they have any oppressed dark hairs. Okay, so that's how I would explain it. Anyone else can chime in here.
I'm going to cut off the recording at the moment. I need to go pick up my child. But Rachel, you can unmute in just a moment and clarify the language that you use, and we can make sure that we continue using these languages over the next couple of sessions to continue this Q&A.
That would be great. I'm going to unshare for now.